Yesterday, the managing director of Nigeria's NLNG, Tony Atta, says the new Train 7 project, which groundbreaking was done by President Buhari, will cost some $10 billion and create 12,000 direct jobs, with further expansion of up to 15 trains in the next pipeline. Joining me to talk more about this mega billion-dollar project and the wider African LNG industry is Olufola Wusu, partner and head of oil and gas at Megathos Law Practice. Good evening and thanks for making it here.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Give me what's the business case for this Train 7 LNG, by the way?
I think the business case is very strong. LNG is happening in Africa in a very big way. We're looking at 46 metric tons per annum. We're looking at 6 countries. And you know, the interesting thing is this: of that 46 metric tons, NLNG is giving 22 metric tons of that. And I think that's huge. NLNG has been around for 30 years, operational for 20 years, and now they're taking the big step. It's huge. It's huge. The EPC stage should take like 5 years. Like you rightly mentioned, we're looking at least 12,000 jobs. And you know, the operations and maintenance stage for the trains 1 to 6, that can take, say, 50 years for the life of each and every plant. Then for Train 7, another 50 years. So we have plenty of opportunities for businesses to be gainfully engaged for close to 300 years. So either way you want to look at it, it's going to be huge. Egina, the $6 billion project, was practically the largest project that we've had in recent times. That's not forgetting the $12 billion Dangote refinery. So for Train 7, either way you want to look at it, you know that in the 30 years of NLNG, this is the first time that NLNG is actually supplying LNG to the domestic markets in Nigeria. So that's another feather in their cap, something that I think Nigerians should celebrate.
Something we should celebrate. The floating LNG is making a showing in Africa with projects coming up in Nigeria. The Egina was an FPSO, by the way. So you've got Ghana, you've got Senegal, and a few others on the card. So is floating LNG better than basing the LNG projects on land?
Well, I think it depends on what you want to achieve. So if you go the route of floating, you can get to the market faster, your OPEX is less, your CAPEX is less. So that the factors that I would say would influence the choice of between a land-based LNG terminal or floating LNG. But if you look at Prelude was more or less the flagship for floating. And Prelude has been having stossers and, you know, a few hitches there and there. So I think one of the key factors that a project promoter should look at if you're trying to pick between a land-based LNG project and floating LNG is the size of that LNG project. Beyond a certain scale, floating is hardly ever profitable.
Nigeria's DPR just issued a license for a floating facility. How would this work? Is it different from Egina?
So basically, Egina was an FPSO for deep offshore drilling. This floating LNG terminal is actually for liquefaction of gas. So basically, when you're trying to pick your LNG facility, if you are trying to liquefy gas assets that are onshore, you're definitely looking at the land-based LNG facility. But if you're looking at gas assets that are offshore, and you remember that recently Nigeria launched this gas development agreement that should actually free up assets in offshore gas. So for those kind of assets, I think the probability is high that they'll be looking at floating LNG terminals to liquefy. And of course, it makes it easier for them to export LNG using a floating terminal. And of course, if you now want to dovetail and you're looking at creating other clusters of value, maybe LNG for power, floating LNG for power, it's easy to put up an FSRU, an FSU, and a power plant either on land or a floating power plant like they're doing in South Africa. And there's a bit of furor over that, but that's still an option. So you're looking at a floating power plant, an FSRU, and an FSU to boost your capacity for LNG utilization.
Okay, let's come back to West Africa, where, of course, we all know we have the West African gas pipeline projects. Nigeria and Ghana are partners in that. But here is Ghana setting up a floating LNG import terminal around Tema Community 7, just on the seaside. So is this a threat to the Wajib?
Well, I'll look at it from this perspective, you know. If you compare, say, Africa and China, China has over 22 LNG import terminals. That LNG import terminal in Ghana should be the first LNG import terminal in Africa. I think it's just a wake-up call for Nigeria to be more strategic in our energy intervention. So when we're talking about the pipeline, either to Algeria or the Trans-Saharan pipeline, we need to be a bit more strategic to be sure that we're making energy choices that are sustainable and that are dynamic enough for us to pivot if for any reason the market conditions change. So I think the project owners for WACP need to think a bit more clearly about that project. I know there's meant to be a phase 2 of the WACP extend it beyond Ghana, this may be a good time to also look at that possibility of extending the pipeline. I know there have been issues of whether or not insufficient gas, some of the buyers of gas owing the sellers of gas, off-spec gas. There have been issues anyway, but I think that of the gas monetization strategies we have employed in Nigeria, I think LNG and WACP have fared creditably well, but I think LNG takes the cake.
Yeah, but here is Ghana sitting in the middle of West Africa trying to do something of its own. Should Nigeria be worried? How should Nigeria respond?
Like I said, I think that we need to reassess our energy strategies as choosing between pipelines and LNG for gas monetization. If you ask me, I'll pick LNG anytime, any day. The numbers for NLNG are great. Over $114 billion in revenue, $35 billion in dividends, maybe over $9 billion for feed gas. The numbers are fantastic. That's huge. So how much is our yearly budget if NLNG is grossing over $110 million, over $114 million in revenue just for selling gas? And that's just with 6 trains. So imagine what kind of capacity NLNG will have with 7 trains. And we're looking at 15 trains. And if you look at Qatar Gas that has 77 metric tons. So imagine if NLNG has that same capacity with Qatar Gas. Qatar Gas is going from 77 metric tons to 110 metric tons. I think the future is bright. That's my perspective.
Yeah, the future is bright. So the NLNG says it's going to start supplying LNG to the Nigerian local gas market after about 20 years. Is this some good news for our power electricity sector? Would this help?
I think it's actually lots of good news because, one of the constraints that the power sector players keep talking about is the absence of gas. They are unable to access gas. So we have a player like NLNG that has a fantastic reputation for being a reliable supplier of LNG. And basically, they're going to be supplying DES, just supplying to the ports that are nominated. And NLNG has 22 metric tons. And with Train 7, NLNG is going to 30 metric tons per annum. So there's enough capacity for NLNG to meet the demands of our power players. So I think it's and you know that if you flash back to the national gas policy that we're privileged to have worked on, one of the innovations that the national gas policy brought about was LNG for domestic use. Before the national gas policy, LNG was basically dedicated strictly for exports. And Nigeria was experiencing a severe energy scarcity. So I think it's brilliant on the part of NLNG to tap in.
I just didn't understand it. I just didn't get it. And nobody seems to get it on the street that we've got gas. We're a major partner in NLNG, yet we're suffering to get gas into those power projects that the Obasanjo administration put together.
So I think that's one of the philosophies that
No, let's talk about philosophies. Nigerians want to understand that we don't have electricity, yet we produce the same gas, we export it, and this energy provider says, look, they're selling it at a higher price to them at international rates, but this is a Nigerian product.
I agree. It has to be a bit mind-boggling. But
I'm not as well upset by that.
I think it's mind-boggling. But if you look at numbers for subsidy that we spend on all subsidies, so it shows us that there's a clear market for even domestic use of gas. So imagine all the billions of dollars we're spending on subsidy. I don't have the accurate figures anyway, but if we build the domestic market for gas, a willing buyer, willing seller, we can begin to do LNG for power, LNG for rail, LNG for ship, LNG for trucks, LNG bunkering. It's going to be huge. I think the golden age of natural gas hasn't really started in Africa. We're just scratching the surface, and I think the potential is huge. See what Qatar has done with Qatar Gas, and see Dubai, see ADNOC. I think gas, the philosophy of LNG for development has come of age, and I'm sure that with the right policy framework and the right execution, we will see the impact of LNG in Nigeria.
You're telling me to discount what the International Energy Agency says about the golden age of natural gas has come to an end, when I'm looking at Total doing $20 billion facility project in Mozambique, despite those force majeure they just declared because of insurgency there.
So this is my perspective. If you look at the 6 LNG producing countries in Africa, we're looking at 46 metric tons. And we're looking at floating LNG in Ghana, floating LNG in Nigeria, floating LNG in Morocco, in Mauritania. So it looks like Africa is just waking up to the reality that gas is a reliable fuel that can power our transition into a developed continent. And we know the 55 countries in Africa, of all the 55 countries in Africa, that LNG import terminal in Ghana is the first one taking place. If you look at China, that has over 22 LNG import terminals, and there was a report I read about China. The spot market in China alone can consume at least 22 metric tons of LNG. So it's obvious that LNG is a reliable fuel to power Africa. And one of the challenge that Africa has had is actually some form of energy scarcity, some level of darkness. So I'm not even, this is my personal opinion anyway, we should be looking at net zero in Africa. We should be looking at access to energy, cheaper, better, faster access to energy. I've seen reports of, emissions, carbon emissions. Africa doesn't play very well. If you look at Nigeria that does, say, 5,000 megawatts capacity, what level of emissions do we want to have? So I think that natural gas is the way forward for Africa. We should be allowed to develop at our pace. The other parts of the world, if you look at, say, for example, go on, sir.
Yeah, I understand. You're fired up because that's what gas is all about, gets you fired.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Thank you very much. We appreciate your insight on this discussion. Olufola Wusu, partner and head of oil and gas at Megathos Law Practice. Let's get this all fired on from here next time.